Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're really getting into something critical. How corporate boards step up as, well, the ultimate guardians of integrity and anti-corruption inside a company.
That's right. And we're drawing heavily from a really insightful interview with John Burke. He provides this fantastic roadmap.
Exactly. A roadmap for how boards can actually institutionalize integrity.
Yeah.
Make it real, not just some words on paper. Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, and what's fascinating, I think, is how Burke takes this idea of tone at the top, which can sound a bit fuzzy, and makes it concrete. Actionable strategies.
Right.
So our mission here is to pull out those practical bits, those aha moments. How does that top-level commitment actually look on the ground, fighting corruption? Because it's not just rules, is it? It's culture. It's effective oversight, making integrity breathe within the organization.
So let's start right there at the foundation. John Burke talks about the board's primary job, embedding a zero-tolerance stance.
Non-negotiable, that's the word he uses.
Right. He says it has to be baked into every decision. It involves approving clear policies, but also making sure they align with strategy.
And crucially, holding management's feet to the fire on enforcement.
He argues pretty forcefully that without that absolute commitment right at the peak, all the controls further down just lose their punch.
They really do. It becomes like optional, which defeats the whole purpose. So what does institutionalizing it look like? You asked that earlier.
Yeah, practically speaking.
Well, it means weaving integrity into the actual governance framework. Think charters, committee mandates, even performance goals.
Okay, so give us an example.
He mentioned their board charter gets revised annually specifically to include anti-corruption metrics and how executives are evaluated.
Wow, okay, that's concrete.
Very. And committees like audit and risk, they're not just getting reports. They have explicit mandates to monitor compliance, demand transparency on breaches, no waiting.
So it's active, not passive oversight.
Exactly. Which leads to a good question for you listening. How deeply is integrity woven into your organization's governance? Is it really operationalized or more aspirational?
That's a key difference, operationalized versus just policy. And that brings us to tone at the top. We hear it all the time. How does Burke say it actually shows up day to day?
And I love this phrase, relentless communication.
Relentless. Okay, not just the annual email then.
Definitely not. He means things like starting every board meeting discussing compliance issues or maybe near misses.
First thing on the agenda.
First thing. They share real stories from the front lines, apparently, to make it human, and they actually publicly recognize people who showed ethical courage.
That sends a huge message, doesn't it?
It really does. Executives see immediately this isn't a side issue, it's the issue.
Okay, so that communication sets the stage. How does that connect to overseeing the internal controls themselves, the nuts and bolts?
Right. Well, Burke says oversight starts with really understanding the control design and, importantly, the rigor of the testing. You can't just assume they work.
Like, knowing the bridge design is one thing, stress testing it is another.
Precisely. So they require internal audit to present quarterly, not just on failures, but on the remediation plans, too.
Keeping track of fixes.
Yes. And then they go a step further. Every 2 years, they bring in independent reviewers to challenge management's own assessment of controls.
So an outside perspective to check for blind spots.
Exactly. It shows the board isn't just delegating and forgetting. They're actively probing, validating, testing the health of that control environment.
That feels very proactive. Which leads to my next question. How do they get ahead of risks? Identifying and mitigating potential corruption before it happens.
Yeah, that's crucial. He described a mandate for this really comprehensive risk mapping exercise. It has to cover all geographies, all business functions, no exceptions.
So mapping out the danger zones.
Pretty much. Management presents the exposure levels, proposed controls, but the board doesn't just, rubber stamp it.
They dig in.
They debate it. They challenge the assumptions. And importantly, they approve the resources needed where the risk is higher than they're comfortable with.
So it's about managing risk appetite actively.
Correct. But you mentioned something earlier. Policies and oversight are one thing, but how do you actually shape behavior? The culture piece. That's more subtle.
Right. How do incentives play into that?
Well, Burke puts it bluntly. Culture is driven by incentives. It's fundamental.
Makes sense.
So they actually tie executive bonuses, partly, to ethical behavior metrics.
Like what, specifically?
Things like how quickly integrity issues get reported in your division, or if your team completes all the mandatory anti-corruption training on time.
So it directly hits the wallet if ethics slip.
It creates that tangible link.
Right.
Plus, they embed integrity questions right into promotion panels.
So when you're up for a promotion,
You know, your track record on ethics, how you foster that culture in your team, is part of the evaluation. It's not just about hitting the numbers.
that's powerful. It signals what really matters for advancement.
Absolutely. Which, again, prompts a question for you listening. Beyond the paycheck, what are the subtle signals in your organization about ethics and career progression? Is it a genuine factor?
Really makes you think. Okay, so what about when things do go wrong? Because inevitably, sometimes they do. How does the board handle whistleblowing speak-up channels?
This is critical for trust. Burke detailed their setup, an independent hotline managed externally.
External is key, right, for independence.
Absolutely. It means reports go straight to the audit committee chair, bypasses internal management layers completely, no chance of suppression.
Safe channel.
And the board gets quarterly summaries, volume, themes, how quickly things are resolved. They insist on a strict no retaliation policy.
Which you'd hope for, but how do they ensure it?
Management's follow-through on that is actually audited independently, so there's verification. It aims to create that truly safe space.
That's comprehensive. But the board's role isn't just internal, is it? They have to face outwards, too.
That's a great point. Burke emphasized that integrity isn't just an internal bubble. It has to be projected outwards, transparently.
To regulators.
Investors. Exactly. He said the board reviews the whole engagement strategy with stakeholders, regulators, investors, NGOs, the lot. They push for disclosures that exceed minimum requirements.
Showing proactive commitment.
Yes. And when new regulations come down the pike, which happens constantly in this area,
Always changing.
the board reviews management's plan to adapt before it gets the final okay. They're building compliance in, not reacting after the fact. It shows it's deeply integrated.
Okay, we've talked a lot about the board overseeing the organization, but what about the board members themselves? How do they stay competent on anti-corruption? It's complex stuff.
It really is, and it requires continuous learning even at that level. Burke mentioned mandatory annual workshops for all directors on integrity and compliance.
Annual refreshers.
And new members get a deep dive during onboarding, global laws, real case studies, and they introduce them to frameworks like the ACI's 10 Principles of Fighting Corruption.
ACI.
American Anti-Corruption Institute. It's a well-regarded framework. They also value specific certifications like the CACM Certified Anti-Corruption Manager.
So specialized expertise is encouraged.
Highly. And it's not one and done. He stressed ongoing competency checks that actually inform future training. So the board itself keeps learning and adapting.
That makes sense. You need the overseers to be sharp.
Which brings us, I guess, to the final piece, measurement. How does the board know if any of this is actually working?
Right, because without data, it's just good intentions. Burke listed key indicators they track constantly.
Such as?
Things like the number of investigations, how long they take to resolve, rates of control breaches, trading completion percentages.
The hard numbers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they don't just look at their own numbers, they benchmark against industry peers. And they report these metrics publicly each year.
Transparency again. And crucially, if those trends start going the wrong way, say, breach rates tick up, the board doesn't just note it. They demand action plans for management with deadlines.
Accountability loop closed.
Perfectly put. It underlines that integrity isn't static. It's not check the box. It's dynamic, measurable, requires constant vigilance, constant adaptation. It's a journey.
Wow. This whole discussion, drawing on John Burke's insights, really paints a picture of a board's role that's incredibly active, incredibly comprehensive.
It really is.
From setting that zero-tolerance foundation, the relentless communication, the proactive risk assessment, shaping culture via incentives, protecting whistleblowers, ensuring their own competence, and then measuring everything. It's a massive commitment.
It truly is. And I think the big takeaway is that genuine integrity isn't just a policy document somewhere. It has to be alive, active, woven into every decision, every person, starting right at the very top. And maybe a final thought for everyone listening. Think about how these principles, these ideas from the boardroom, could actually apply in your own world, your team, your department.
Yeah.
Where could that zero-tolerance stance, maybe on smaller things, or that commitment to relentless communication about what's right, where could that make a real difference in fostering integrity, whatever your role is?
That's a great challenge, something to definitely mull over. How does this apply day to day for all of us?
Exactly. Reflect on your own organization's reality against this benchmark. It might spark some useful insights.